Ken Corley, and we welcome this opportunity to speak to this important report on an area of Irish life which has seen a huge level of public policy failure over many generations, and possibly since the foundations of the state. In the time allotted to me, I just want to speak to some of the key findings and indeed some of the challenges that it presents us all, and also to some of the solutions, as you mentioned yourself. Minister, you've spent some of your allotted time on the report, but the key findings about lone parents are significantly affected. Less than 25% of lone parents reported home ownership, compared with 70% of the total population. Overcrowding, ethnic minority groups has a significant higher risk of overcrowding. Over 35% of Asian Irish, 39% of travellers and 40% of Black Irish live in overcrowded accommodation, compared to 6% of the total population. Migrant impacts, 48% of migrants live in the private rental sector, compared to 9% of those born in Ireland. Disability and housing quality, 29% of persons living with a disability experience housing quality issues when compared to those without a disability, 21%. And the continuing problem of homelessness highlights a very disadvantaged section of the community for whom the most basic measure of adequate housing, as envisaged under international human rights agreements, are not being met. Key challenges which the report outlines: COVID and homelessness, use of private rental accommodation has been outlined in the previous points, but the rents rising faster than wages. Despite the introduction of rent pressure zones in late 2016, rents have increased by almost 40% in Dublin and 20% elsewhere. Rental costs have risen at a faster rate than mean earnings in Dublin and elsewhere. In 2020, mean monthly rent in Ireland was estimated to be 31% of mean monthly earnings. So, in terms of what this means and what we need to address, Minister, and I say it's a fundamental problem, because surely in the Irish context, a hugely disproportionate amount of families and individuals' income is spent on accommodation, totally disproportionate to the rest of Europe, and it's strangling their ability to live good lives, love-filled lives, fun-filled lives, because you're ploughing all this money into accommodation, be it rent or mortgage repayments. So we do need a rent freeze, and that discussion has been well articulated in this House. And it's not unconstitutional, despite what your colleagues may say. Private renters and those renting from local authorities are at significant higher rates of poverty than owner-occupiers. So this highlights the need for greater protections for tenants, and why so many of those entering homelessness are coming from the private rental sector. So inadequate housing and poor housing quality is inevitably associated with higher mortality rates. And the figures clearly show that we need to reformulate our approach to housing policy to reflect that there are many people who live alone, many people who never marry or are lone parents. We must not keep calculating affordability on the basis of joint incomes. Now, I grew up in an Ireland where it was not unusual for a mortgage to be able to be obtained by a family that had one earner. This is clearly leading to the current situation where you can't effectively get a mortgage unless it's a dual income household. It's clearly leading to detrimental outcomes for those living alone in terms of affordability and housing quality. And I think that's something that we really have to grapple with. And that's a change in the relatively recent past. And we need more disaggregated data, particularly related to nationality and disability, and further research in order to ensure accurate representation. There must also be targeted data collection going further as to ensure adequate representation from certain groups, including travel and Roma communities. And there is a strong case for a comprehensive national survey on housing adequacy and affordability. Unfortunately, housing says more about sometimes your status in Irish life than any other facet of your life. But I will re-emphasise this point, Minister. The way our dysfunctional housing market, our dysfunctional housing history, is making people desperately unhappy. And if we did it differently, people in general would be leading much more fulfilling, much more love-filled and much more fun-filled lives. And that's on all of us. It's just not sustainable, the model which has been created for those who want to live